So we've looked at sunshine and we've looked at the importance of it, and I trust today will be a nice day to get into the sun because it's not too hot, not yet. And this morning we're going to have a look at the importance of water. We looked at what sleep does for us every night. Tomorrow morning I'll be looking in detail at our subject, trusting God. In fact, my 11 o'clock presentation is called To Renew the Mind. And we looked at the things that must not go into the human body if you're looking for optimum performance. And I'm sure everyone's been practicing breathing through their nose and out through their nose. Yesterday we spent the morning on nutrition. And yesterday we also looked at the importance of taking everything in moderation. And the last and certainly not least is exercise. Isn't Carlos an inspiration? In fact, when I saw him, I thought it was a young man. His fit body, his stance, and you get a little close and you can see he's not that young, but what an inspiration that we can enjoy, you know, even up into, I think he's in his late 70s now. Yeah, so that's it's good to have illustrations of the results of keeping these laws. Our exercise coordinator at Misty Mountain Health Retreat, his name is Howard. He's worked with us for over 20 years. I gauge it on the age of his eldest son. Maybe he's 21 years, I think Laz is 20 now. And the guests, and he's turning 60 this year, and the guests think that he's in his late 30s. That's quite incredible, isn't it? And he's our exercise coordinator, and he certainly spends a lot of time in exercise. But first of all, before we go into water, because these are the two we're going to look at this morning, I want to look in detail at exercise. And the most powerful form of exercise is the high-intensity interval training. Now, the reason why this is a powerful form of exercise is because of the effect that it has on the body. But what excites me about this form of exercise is it only takes 15 minutes a day. Are you interested? One man said to me, he said, I know I should exercise, but I don't have an hour a day to do a 5-kilometre jog. I said, Dave, you don't need an hour a day. So this high-intensity interval training, as the name implies, these are intervals of high intensity, intervals of recovery, and they're usually done for a cycle. In the book Body by Science, Dr. Doug McGuff, he shows us why this is such a powerful form of exercise. Now, he was looking at exercise for his heart patients because he's a cardiologist. He wanted a form of exercise that was reachable, that was attainable, and that strengthened the heart. And so he looked historically, and he came across the high-intensity interval training, and he saw that it was first being implemented probably before the wars broke out. And he found a German physiologist who was putting his athletes through it and getting better times, you know, in the games. And then everything was lost, the First War, and it wasn't long after that, the Second World War. And the next time he saw mention of it was in about the 1980s, where a Japanese trainer was called Tabata, was putting his girls through the high-intensity interval training. And he got them to do 20 seconds high intensity and a 60-second recovery for a cycle of 6. They were figure skating. That's what they were doing. And he found when it time for the games, they had an edge. And isn't that what it's all about? Because in the Olympic Games, every single person that goes there is the best in their country. And sometimes it can be a split second, can't it? So that's what the trainers are looking for, something that will give their athletes an edge, just this little bit of an edge. And he found that they certainly did. In fact, in some gyms today, you've still got the Tabata protocol. There's like a cycle of different high intensities, you know, rowing machine, push-ups, rebounder, you know, you've got different things. What Doug McGuff came at, he came at a protocol that he felt that was more probably in line with the average person, even though it was more high intensity, 30 seconds, it was a 90-second recovery time. And he did this for a cycle of 6. And he, as every good investigator does, they try it on themselves first, is that right? And he couldn't believe the effect. Within a few weeks, he was sleeping better. Within a few weeks, he found that at the end of the day, he was not as tired. Within a few weeks, he found his digestion was improving. His bowel habits were improving. In fact, it seemed to affect every single part of his life. And his mood. He found that he wasn't getting as irritable. And so he was impressed. And yet, if you've done the maths on that, being generous, it's no more than 15 minutes a day. I've read a few books on this. One's called Fast Exercise by Dr. Michael Mosley. Also, Dr. Al Sears, he's called the Exercise Doctor. His book PACE, which means Progressive Acceleration of Cardiopulmonary Exertion. I'll repeat all that in a minute. In fact, in case it's just PACE. His book is PACE. And so, you know, the proverb says, in the multitude of counsellors there's safety. So whatever I present, I look at it from different angles, from different writers, and you always pick up something. Every writer puts a slightly different slant on it. And so I began to implement this. And 30 seconds doesn't sound much. Try it. So what is high intensity? It's running for your life. What Michael and I do, we run up the hills and we walk down the hills at Misty Mountain. We walk up the next hill and down. And I really like going on the other side of the canal because the road's so rocky. And I wear barefoot runners. And barefoot runners aren't great on all the rocks and things. And so there's a track the other side of the canal and it's grass. And it's going up and down a little bit. But I found a track this morning. It was called, I think, the Pine Forest track. Wow, that got me really good. But something touched me. I don't know whether it's stinging nettle. Do you have stinging nettle here? And I thought, oh, I wonder if that's this poison ivy I hear about. But it touched my leg, so I didn't go back that way. I came down the road. So high intensity really is anything that will get the heart rate up and the breathing increased. So if you can't run, it might be push-ups. If you can't do push-ups, it might be push-ups on the wall. If you're on the rebounder, it can be jogging on the rebounder. Most of the research has been done on the exercise bike. I saw also a documentary on this. And what they did was they chose a girl she was a journalist. She was probably about 38. She looked fairly slim, not as little as me, but, you know, she looked very nice. And what they did with her is they got her to do the 30 seconds high intensity, but they allowed her 15 minutes recovery. And they did this for a cycle of 3. So they did it slightly different. And what they did was before they put her through this, they measured, you know, her torso, her weight, you know, all the basic things. And they were filming her as she's going through it. And when she's to the end of the 30 seconds, you could see it was a real challenge to her. And sometimes it was on the exercise bike. The beauty of the exercise bike is that you're holding on. So for people who are a little unstable on their feet, people who have ankle, knee or hip problems, it's a lot easier, and you can cycle as hard and fast as you can, and then your recovery time can be just slowly cycling. They have discovered that in recovery time, it's far more effective if you move, but at a slower rate. You just move a little slower. For Michael and I, running up the hills, walking down the hills. How do you know when you're ready back for the high intensity? Your body will tell you. You've got your breath back. The heart rate has settled down a little bit. And you'll find if you go back too soon, then it's hard to even do the 30 seconds. I always count, because if I don't count, I won't go 30. Because at 25, my body's starting to say, that'll do. That's enough. So push yourself to that 30. Al Sears says in his book, he had a lady who he was one of his patients. She did 7 seconds high intensity and she needed 15 minutes to recover. I give you that story because not everyone's quite that unfit. But his book, the first P is progressive. This is progressive. The more that you do it, the easier it gets. Your fitness is not determined by how hard and fast you go. Your fitness is determined by your recovery time. So this journalist, this female journalist who they were putting through with this, she didn't exercise. And so they went a little bit lighter with her and allowed her 4 minutes to recover. But I think she did it for something like 3 months. 3 months they put her through it. And she said the same thing as Doug McGuff said with his. She said, I can't believe it, I'm not getting as tired in the afternoon, I'm sleeping better. She said, everything in my life has improved by just taking this little chunk in the day. But you know what the surprise was? When they measured her, she'd lost 2 inches off her waist. Now she just did it for fitness. It's balanced out her body weight. It's like the program that we're putting you through, 2 days juicing and then eating breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, tea like a pauper. We find that the overweight take off weight, lose weight. We find that the underweight put on a bit, and we find those that are the right weight basically just stay the same. What Doug McGuff said, and I know my son said, a friend of his, he was small here and big here, and as he exercised, this came in and this came out. It just helps to balance the weight in the body, because we live in an amazing body with an inbuilt ability to heal itself. So you just start where you are and you just start with what you can do. But what I'm ever thankful to Doug McGuff for is he takes you inside the cell. So that's where we're going to go now. And I'm going to take you somewhere that I've been getting you familiar with all week. So the glucose goes into the cell and it goes through a 20-step pathway. And the 20-step pathway, how much energy, students?
3.
Nearly 2. And that's the anaerobic pathway, called the anaerobic pathway because it doesn't use oxygen. The end result of this 20-step pathway is the chemical form of glucose called pyruvate. And pyruvate, as the chemical form of glucose, gets fed into the powerhouse, called the powerhouse of the cell. Okay, students, how much energy? 36. Yay! 18 times more energy. That's why the old saying says you will receive more energy than you expend on your morning exercise. Can you see why? Because this is the aerobic pathway. And the aerobic pathway uses oxygen. And we also looked at how in the muscle cells specifically, you've got little bunches of grapes and they're little molecules of oxygen. So the glucose goes in. Number 1, it gets sent to the cell. Number 2, it gets stored as glycogen. Your quick release glucose stores, that's why you don't have to eat before you exercise, because you've got glycogen stores. And let's draw our fat cell, because I want to show you what happens. And on that high carbohydrate diet, people are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now this pathway, and we discussed this is a very fast pathway. Whereas the 8th step is a lot slower. So let me show you what happens in the cell with your high intensity. Let's go to Doug McGuff's one. This is the one I usually do. So when you're getting to the end of your first set of high intensity, 20 steps speeds up, 8 steps speeds up. That's not a surprise. But because of the faster revs of this one, more pyruvate is being made than can be fed into the powerhouse. So the body has to store it on the side as lactic acid. You've heard of lactic acid. But what's incredible is that when you're in recovery time, your liver converts the lactic acid to pyruvate and feeds it into the powerhouse. Do you know what that means? Two things are happening here. When you're in recovery time, you're burning just as much fuel as when you're running for your life, and in recovery time, all the lactic acid is being mopped up. And that is one of the reasons these athletes have an edge. They have an edge because of this very process that's happening inside the cell. So it's not an excuse because you can't go any further when you say, let's look at the view. If you're climbing a mountain, it's actually important. You look at children, they never jog. They run or stop, or they run or stop. Isn't that true? You look on the soccer field, what are they doing? Kicking the goal, and then everyone walks back to their place. Basketball, and then the ball goes in and everyone goes back. Let's go to the African plains. No animal jogs. They're either still, or then, oh, here's the tiger, run for their life. It's interval. When I was a little girl, the games we used to play in the playground were hopscotch. And when it's my turn, that's high intensity doing the hopscotch, hop, 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 hop. Or skipping. When I'm skipping, wow, have you seen how some people skip? When I was in the Bronx, of a Saturday night, the teenagers would get out on the footpath with the ropes. And they'd have 2 ropes, and they're just... they asked me if I wanted to go. I said, I'll just watch. Whoa, they're just chatting to each other, and the ropes are going like this. So the one that's in the ropes, there's your high intensity. So this interval, these intervals of high intensity, now the research is showing is the most effective form of exercise because it mops up that build-up of lactic acid in the cell. Nobody ever dies of a heart attack doing the high intensity interval training, but there are stories of people keeling over and dying on a 5K jog. Because on a 5K jog, what's building up, students? The lactic acid, yeah. And what they find is if a person's got a triathlon, the best way to prepare is this. Training like this gives them the ability to do the 5K jog or the, 10K, whatever they're doing in the triathlon. I was watching the Olympic Games. I love watching the Olympic Games, I think, because we love excellence, is that right? And I was travelling, and every time I went to an airport, I'd have a look in the big screen, what are we up to? And I think it had the 10-kilometre run. Do they have a 10-kilometre run? Anyway, it's a big one. And there were these 2 real skinny Africans up the front. And the commentator was saying, you can see these people haven't run in a race much before. It's the first time they've entered. They're up the front too fast. Let's go back. Ah, yes, here are the favourites. Here's the Russian, here's the American, here's the Australian, here's the Swede. They're doing the sensible thing. They're biding their time. And then I didn't see it again. And then next airport, I go and have a look, and apparently it was the last event. And here's the oval with first, second and third. Guess who was first and second? The Africans. They're probably running from tigers, you know. So that commentator had to eat his words. I read a book called Born to Run by Christopher McDougall, and it's about the barefoot running. And his story is interesting. I saw it at my daughter's house because I'm such a reader. I'm always looking for books to read. And she said, yeah, take it, Mum, I've got two. Oh, that was a fascinating book. He was a runner and he had hamstring problems, he had lower back, he had pelvic problems. So he decided to take a few months off, travel the world and interview runners. And he also looked at the history. And as he interviewed, he actually found something interesting. He found that barefoot runners don't get hamstring problems, don't get lower back, because barefoot runners, and you try running barefoot on your heel, you never will. Barefoot runners run on their toes. They run on the balls of their feet. And then historically, he found Abibi Bikila. Have you heard of Abibi Bikila? Abibi Bikila was an African who won gold in 1960, 1964 Olympic Games. Barefoot runner. Nike and Reebok hate him. You know what I mean? So I was so interested in the barefoot running. And it was another book where the guy's an evolutionist and talks about the evolving and this. And then he goes to the foot doctors and he studies the foot and he says, it's an incredible design. And I thought, make up your mind, mate. Did we evolve or were we designed? And the foot is an incredible design. Because when you run on your toes, your balls of your foot, your toes spread out, your toes, it's incredible what happens. Your toes grab, your big toe grabs, and what happens, all the little muscles, teguments, tendons and ligaments, they're designed to cushion as you run. You look at children, how do they run? Always on their toes. Always in their toes. But what's happened with these joggers today, they've built up the heel so that people heel strike. And what this guy found was that all of his problems were because of those cushioned runners where they heel striked. But the toe strike never has those problems. So that's when I went out and bought my barefoot runners, hoping they'd be a bit cheaper, but they're not. And I started to run in my barefoot runners. Yeah, they don't like the real rocky roads because you know they've got such a thin sole. So when you buy them, the toe and the heel should be able to meet like this when they're new. And I just love those barefoot runners. You just fly when your feet are barely touching the ground. But the next day when I woke up, oh, was I sore. And that's when I realised you use totally different muscles when you toe strike, when you're striking with your toe. I never used to wear joggers, but a friend of mine said, Barbara, just try them. They're like armchairs on your feet. So I got some and I thought, oh, they're pretty good. But no more, no more. Now I have my barefoot runners and I run on my toes. So if you're a runner, make sure you're a toe runner. Also experiment, go on the grass. You will not run with your heel. Your body won't let you, because every heel strike is a jar. It's a jar to the body. And he talks about runners who've been running for years. You know what's happening? Hip, knee, lower back, ankle problems, even when they're late 40s. Starting to go in their 50s. So let's go back to our illustration here. So we've just finished our first set of high intensity, and these are speeding up, but the rate setting enzyme in there always keeps this one a little bit slower. So in recovery time, the liver converts that built up lactic acid back to pyruvate. So when you go back into your next set of high intensity, the lactic acid has been all cleared up. So we're getting to, say, our third set of high intensity, and the glycogen stores are running out. So what the body does now, it causes a release of the human growth hormone. The human growth hormone is very active when we are growing. So as children, our human growth hormone is active. Mine went into retirement at the age of 16. That probably doesn't surprise you. My son William grew 2 inches from 19 to 21. Boys can still be growing. So when I met an 18-year-old in Ireland last year who was 6'6", his father was 6'8", I don't know where he's going to go. He's 6'6" at 18. So it goes into retirement. And there are a lot of people who are very busy in retirement. So when you are getting to your third set, glycogen stores are running out, we need more fuel. And so the brain causes a release of the human growth hormone, which triggers the activity of hormone-sensitive lipase. Hormone-sensitive lipase is an enzyme, and if you remember yesterday when we looked at fats, the sublingual lipase under your tongue breaks up the saturated fat, the pancreatic lipase and the bile break down polyunsaturated fats. So what fat does this lipase break up? Our stored fats. It's basically what the human growth hormone does is it unlocks the door to the basement to get some more stores out. So hormone-sensitive lipase is released, which starts to break up the fat stores. The human growth hormone causes the body to stop burning as glucose as fuel and become a fat burner. Now we looked at this also earlier in the week, that glucose, it burns at 4 calories per gram. Fat burns at 9 calories per gram. And remember what a calorie is? It's a unit of energy. What Dr. Robert Atkins found is you can be on a 2,500 calorie a day diet that's all carbohydrates and you can put on weight. You can be on a 2,500 calorie a day diet that is high fibre, generous proteins, healthy fats, and you can lose weight. So any book that's still counting calories, sorry, they're back with the dinosaurs. Calorie counting has been shown, it doesn't work. There's calories and there's calories. So when, I don't know if you saw how much olive oil I put on my toast this morning. My toast is covered in olive oil. Fat doesn't make you fat. It wouldn't be nice if I put half a cup on it, would it? No, it's just a little. Can you see why the body starts burning fat as fuel? Because it's going to give more than twice the units of energy that the glucose will give. Because we want a high octane fuel here. This person's running for their life. What are we doing? Going to the 5th gear? The human growth hormone also increases the body's ability to utilise protein. This week we've looked at the importance of eating sufficient protein. That scrambled tofu on avocado on Simple Needs bread, pretty nice, isn't it? I think I could have that every morning. We've looked at the importance of eating adequate protein. We've looked at the importance of not drinking with the meals, so we're not watering down our digestive juices that break down the protein. Now we're looking at another aspect, and that is the high intensity interval training causing a release of the human growth hormone increases our body's ability to utilise the protein. The last one, it increases the circulation of the blood to the skin. Now we know Carlos's secret. When you increase the circulation of the blood to the skin, you slow down aging because you're nourishing that skin. Perfect health requires perfect circulation. And perfect circulation means my toes are as warm as my torso. My fingers are as warm as my torso. The whole body should be the similar temperature. The movie stars pay $1,000 a week for the human growth hormone. Can you see why? Because their profession is dependent on them looking good, and this keeps them looking good. It slows down aging, nourishes the skin. Well, I'm offering it to you cut price today. 15 minutes high intensity interval training a day will cause a release of the human growth hormone, and it'll remain active for 24 hours. What a bargain. I'm so excited because this is the first week I've been able to get out and exercise because of my broken toe. So what did I do? I did push-ups every day, push-ups on my knees. I could do push-ups on my knees. And I found last week I could rebound, but I had to listen to that little toe. Oh, what a little tiny toe can do. Sometimes I think God just slows me down. And when I break my little toe, do you know what he wants me to say? Thank you, Father in heaven. Anyway, got more push-ups done than I usually do. You just got to find where to put it in. And I find if you don't make an appointment, you don't do it. Best time is early in the morning, because when you do it early in the morning, you will reap the benefits all day. And I challenge you to see if you will not be mentally, emotionally, spiritually and physically better prepared for anything that comes your way in the day. And things come our way, don't they? So you just got to find a spot where you need to put it in. I never used to exercise because I thought I'm busy all day, I'm running here, I'm running there, I'm digging the garden. I don't need to exercise because I'm so active. That's what I thought, until I went to New Zealand. And this happened to me it's probably about 18 years ago now. I went to New Zealand. We still had a couple of kids at home. So at home I have to get up, put the breakfast on, put the wash on, get the kids up, I always do my prayer and Bible study in the morning, so I was busy in the morning. So I stayed with a girl, and she was twice my size, 10 years younger than me. She's a Maori girl. And she said, Barbara, I do a 5K walk in the morning. Do you want to join me? And I said, love to. Didn't have to get the kids out of bed, put the breakfast on, put the Halfway along our 5K walk, I found it hard to keep up with her. She's twice my size. I'm the health teacher. The next morning when I woke up, I could hardly move. Ooh, ooh. She said, are you coming? And I said, sure. I'm the health teacher. She had a friend with her that day. They were just way ahead of me as I struggled along. You know what I said to my body? I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you. I've got to start working out. Being busy all day is not enough. I learnt my lesson. So to be able to fit it into the day, and at that point I didn't know about the high intensity, to be able to fit it in the day, I had to get up a little bit early, which means I went to bed a little bit earlier. So I used to walk at 5:30 in the morning then, because that was half hour. Then I used to do 2K in half hour. I used to always get cold feet. Always I would be sitting in the ensuite with my feet in hot water trying to warm them up before I went to bed. I just thought it was me. How many people think that's just them? My hands that often get cold. We're down in Victoria, which is bottom of Australia. Further down you go, the colder it gets. Now we're in the middle, cold winters, hot summers. After a few weeks, I'd come back into the house, scarf off, gloves off. Oh, it's hot in this room. Let's turn the heating down. Everyone's in there saying, what happened to you? What happened to you out there? Do you know what happened to me out there? And a friend of mine who did a PhD on the effect of exercise in the cell, he told me that. He said, I'll tell you what's happening to you out there. He said, you've opened a network of capillaries in the body that equals the distance around planet Earth. I could hardly get my mind around that one. What's he talking about? All the little tiny ones in our eyes, in our ears, in our brain, in our extremities. No more did I get cold feet. Because what I did, I got that blood moving all to the extremities. Your heart will always pump. But what you can do when you exercise, you can make it more effective, and that blood goes right out to those extremities. That's brain. No wonder Dr. Neil Nedley, when he gets someone who's severely depressed or even schizophrenic, he puts them on 7 hours of exercise a day. He says after 1 week, they're so much better because those little capillaries, they open up in the brain. Anyway, I got a chance to test it. I got a chance to test my fitness about 2 years later. And 2 years later, I went to Wildwood and I was giving lectures on a Friday night. I got there Thursday afternoon and I had a good sleep. Thursday morning, I'm looking for something to do, wandering around, and I found a little herb shop. And I went in there and there's a young man there and he's got a book out in front of him behind the counter and he's looking at things. And when I walked in, he looked and he looked again. He said, Barbara O'Neill. He said, can you hold me here? I said, sure. And I told him a few things, but people kept coming in to the shop and he said, I shut at 12. He said, what are you doing this afternoon? I said, nothing. He said, want to go on a mountain climb? I said, love to. So I went on a mountain climb. This was quite a mountain. It's actually up behind Wildwood. So we started about 3 in the afternoon and it took us an hour to get to the top, so maybe it equals one of the points out here. And I pushed myself because I didn't want to slow him down because he's 35. I didn't want to slow him down because he's, you know, he's very fit. But every now and then I'd say, let's just look at the view. Nice view around here. And then we'd go again. And when I got to the top, I said, it's 50 minutes till dark. We're up the top of the mountain. I said, I think we have to run. He said, yeah, we do. So we walked on the steep bits, but when it sort of got more sloping, we ran and we ran and we ran. Not high intensity, just jogging. And it was just so incredible how much energy you get when you start to do this. But remember, I'd been doing this for a couple of years. And we got down to the flat and the sun is setting. And I remember running past this lake thinking, oh, I'd like to dive in that lake, like I think Alvin must have felt yesterday with the beads of perspiration on it. Anyway, I finally got back to my room and it was dark. And I had the best shower I think I've ever had. But I thought, I'm going to be sore tomorrow. No soreness. No soreness at all, and yet I had pushed myself to the extreme. So that was my experiment on myself that proved to me this is a very powerful form of exercise. And yet it seems like not, because it's just a little tiny chunk in the day. Mind you, when you get to the peak of your 30 seconds, that's the only time you feel very, very pushed. But it's just brief. They're just little brief bits. And in his book, Fast Exercise, Dr. Michael Mosley, he gives a story of a young man who was an athlete all through his high school years. And he was, you know, their champion runner. And then he went into med school. Lot of study. And the university had their yearly games coming up, and he didn't put his name down because he was so busy. And he didn't go to training because he was so busy. And his friends said, you're not going to enter? And he said, oh, righto, put his name down. And then they'd see him over the weeks and they said, you're not coming to training? And he said, I haven't got time. I just haven't got time. But when he was studying and he'd feel a little bit sleepy, he'd jump up, run round the oval as fast as he could, and then come back and keep studying. And he would do this almost on the half hour. Run as fast as he could around the oval, come back, go back to study. And that's how he could do his study without falling asleep. And then it came time for the games. Guess who won? He won. And everyone said, you haven't even come to training. He said, I don't know. But he was actually doing that high intensity interval training. In his book, PACE, Dr. Al Sears, PACE means progressive. This is progressive. If you can't quite get to the 30 seconds, and if your recovery time is 4 minutes or 5 minutes, so be it. Because this is progressive. That's why write down your recovery time. That's the one you write. Write down your recovery time, because as you get fitter, it will get less and less and less. And that will be very encouraging. Part of being your own doctor is documenting your case. And in a few weeks, you'll forget what you were doing here. And sometimes your healing will accelerate, and sometimes your healing will plateau. And in the plateauing time, it's nice to go back to your journal and go, actually, I've come a long way. Because, you know, can you remember what you ate for lunch 2 weeks ago on a Tuesday? No, you don't remember. It doesn't have to be an extensive journal, just light. Write the important points. So progressive, acceleration, you are moving. There's a tiger running after you. And there's a book called The Gabriel Method. I'll have to give it to you in kilos. I'll guess in pounds. This guy was 183 kilos, so I think that's nearing 400 pounds. He was like this. There's pictures of him in his book, just huge. He lost 103 kilo. What would that be? Over 200 pounds. So he's 83 kilo now, which would be 160 pounds. I'm just guessing. And there's a picture of him on the front cover of his book. He hasn't got a shirt on, and he's in his 40s, got pants on, and you can count his abs. And then he's inside a pair of his old pants, and they come out like this. He's holding them out. Wow, what happened? Well, he doesn't talk about the high-intensity interval training, and he doesn't talk about the human growth hormone. I think the book was written early 90s, something like that. But that's exactly what he was doing, because what he would do, he'd be walking along and he'd pretend there was a tiger after him, so he'd jump down and do 30 push-ups. So he was actually doing the high-intensity interval training. And people say, where's all the extras? It's the blood to the skin. When you increase the circulation of the blood to the skin, it pulls it in, pulls it in, pulls it in. So that's the, I've got the book because of the photos. Right in the middle of the book, there's 4 photos of him. This big, this big, this big, and then muscular, like looks like Carlos, but he's in his 40s, and you would never think that someone who looked like that could get to this. So there's hope for us all. Yeah.
Nowadays they're doing the bariatric surgery in order to lose all those weight.
That's right. So we're hearing from a surgical nurse here that they're going into surgery to have all the excess cut off. But what are you left with now? Pretty bad scars. And you've heard of the liposuction. Have you ever seen what they do? They put this long tube in and the guy's going shove, shove, shove. Oh, the damage done to the tissues. No, let's just stick to this. And Doug McGuff was asked the question, what's the most important, diet or exercise? Now, I agree with his answer, but his answer surprised me because he's an exercise doctor. He said 80% is diet. Got that? 80% is diet. Because as we saw yesterday, the food you eat determines how it's burnt in the cell. Isn't that true? So progressive acceleration, cardiopulmonary is the C in the word PACE. Cardio, the more you use that heart, the stronger it gets. So I'll give you the story of my son Peter. He was doing high intensity up and down the hills of Brisbane, training for a triathlon. I think he was about 26. And he's a tiler. He's at work and he's dismantling an old vanity unit, sort of an old 50s one. It had a big chip out of it, And as he got it, it slipped and hit his ankle. I think if he hadn't had a bone there, it would have sliced his foot off. And the blood touched the roof. He called out to my son, James, who's 5 years older. He said, James. Apparently James said, I'm on the phone, mate. That's real Aussie, isn't it? And Peter said, quick, I need help. By the time James got in, the blood was sprayed beautifully all over the ceiling and the walls. Anyway, they bound it up, took him into hospital, and the nurse kept taking his pulse. 50 beats per minute. You don't get many 50 beats per minute in a hospital. Why was Peter's heart rate 50 beats per minute? Because he's running up and down hills. Strengthening that heart. That heart got so strong, it didn't have to beat as much. And it was so strong that when it was cut, it hit the roof. Now, if his resting heart rate was 70 beats per minute, where would the blood have hit? Not the roof. It would have gone blimp, blimp. So you look at a heart rate of 50 beats per minute, boom, rest, boom, rest, boom, rest, boom, rest. You look at 50 beats per minute, boom, rest, boom, rest. You see that there's more rest. That's heart. That is the heart that'll go longer. I think if you come here in 15 years, I think Carlos will still be the exercise coordinator. What do you reckon? And he probably won't look much different. You see, muscle knows no age. Whether you're 9 or 90, you can have strong muscles. That's the good news. And I'm the master of my destiny. And this is the best insurance policy that you can make. How many hours in a day? 24 hours in a day. You actually can't afford not to do it. You just got to find out what works for you. So progressive acceleration of cardiopulmonary. Pulmonary is lungs. And in his book, Al Sears quotes the Framingham Heart Study. We've looked at the Framingham Heart Study a few times. Mentioned it last night, I think. 30,000 people in the little town of Framingham. Some die, some come on. Set up to prove that cholesterol causes heart disease, but it still has not. In fact, it's proved the opposite, and it found that people with high cholesterol levels don't get Alzheimer's. Remember I quoted that? Well, what the Framingham Heart Study also showed is that by the age of 50, most people had lost 40% lung capacity. That's alarming. Most people by the age of 80 had lost nearly 60% lung capacity. Why is that? Because they're breathing like this up here. They're not breathing down here. When you breathe down there, you're breathing every part of your lung. But when you breathe high chest, why would your person breathe high chest? Because they're slouched. And when you're slouched, you can't use your abdominal muscles in the breathing process. Maybe their skirt or pants are so tight, you should be able to put your fist in there to allow those abdominal muscles to come in and out. So how can we prevent losing that lung capacity? High intensity interval training. If you've lost it, how can you get it back? High intensity interval training. That's the good news. Most people lose lung capacity because they stop exercising. We're training for something more important than the Olympic Games too. Do you know what we're training for? We're training for our latter years. And we know Jesus is coming soon. And we know there's a world to warn. But the saints are sick. They're sick. Where's his army? So it's time to start training. And there's a lovely verse in the Bible that talks about the race. It's found in 1 Corinthians 9:25. It says, "Know you not that they that run in a race run all, but one receives the prize?" It's talking about the Olympic Games. It says, "I therefore so run, but not as uncertainty. So fight I, but not as one that beats the air. I keep under my body. I bring it into subjection, if by any means I myself might be a castaway." I keep under my body. Because you know what your body's going to say when you wake up in the morning? Oh, I don't need to exercise today. I'll just stay in bed a little longer. Say, no, up. I keep under my body, I keep it into subjection. Only one receives the prize. Every man that strives for the mastery is temperate in all things, meaning moderation. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, we an incorruptible. This is a crown that will never pass away. And the training they did, and you know what it was in those days? It was a vine that had been woven. So by the end of the day, the leaves are fading. That's why the Bible says, now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, a crown that actually... All that work for that, well actually it was the honour too. They do it to obtain a corruptible crown, we an incorruptible. I therefore so run, but not as uncertainly. So fight I, but not as one that beats the air. I keep under my body. I bring it into subjection. If by any means when I have preached to others, I myself might be a castaway. So progressive acceleration of cardiopulmonary exertion. You are moving. This is no gentle stroll. This is fast. This is going very fast. No matter your age, no matter what you do. And if you are in a sedentary job, it's even more important. And if you are in a physical job, it's still important. Because even if you're busy all day, that morning exercise does not do what, being busy all day does not do what that morning little chunk does. It's just a tiny little chunk. This is your lymphatic system, and your lymphatic system has little gates all the way along it. And your blood capillary system is also a network of capillaries, but your blood system has little muscles surrounding it. So when your heart pumps, it pumps all the way through and down your whole capillary network till it gets to the toes or the fingertips. How does the blood get back? You have a second heart. It's your calf muscle. And your calf muscle is what pumps the blood back. That's why anyone with varicose veins, they should do this a lot. Go up and down on their toes. And what are we told to do in the plane? Wiggle the feet, because when you wiggle your feet, it causes your heart muscle to go. But the lymphatic system has no pump. So how do we move that? And when you realise that your lymphatic system is your body's vacuum cleaner, it's sweeping away waste from the tissues, and it sweeps away waste from the tissues into the lymph nodes under your arm, in your groin, in your neck, and the only open one straight out is your tonsils. Have you found that when you oil pull, you'll cough up a lump or two? It's your tonsils. It was a crazy, crazy decision to cut the tonsils out. You know, if they're swollen, there's a reason for that. It's actually telling you something. That's why we have to listen. Listen. And you know what you do when you listen? You listen to what the body's saying, you try different things, and you see what your body responds to. And when it's responding, you're listening. And sometimes it'll go, that helped, and sometimes, no, that didn't do much. Let's try something else. That's why you're the doctor. No one can tell you what your body can tell you. So how do we stimulate this lymphatic system? Movement of arms and legs do. But what moves it in the most powerful way is the rebounder. Rebounder is the only exercise that actually affects every single cell in the body. There is not one single cell that is not affected by jumping on the rebounder. I read a book, and it was here. It was in Dr. Keith's office. And there was a guest who was to come for a consult. And it was half an hour, and she still hadn't come. I found out later that She wanted out. Her husband brought her here for a present, but she doesn't eat any vegetables at all. And she was not impressed that he brought her to a vegetarian health retreat. So that's why I'm sitting in Dr. Keith's office and I'm ever looking for a book, and there I saw it in his library. It was a book on rebounding by Albert Carter. It was written in the 80s, and there's a picture of Albert Carter and he's just like this, you know, count the muscles. And he was an Olympian trampolinist, and then he married, and then he and his wife did trampoline shows. They'd go from town to town, have all the kids in there doing it. And he noticed a few things. His little boy was only little, but if anyone challenged him at school, he would challenge them to push-ups, and no one could equal him. He could do 1,000 push-ups, this little boy. And then he noticed his little 4-year-old girl, he could hold her ankles and she'd do one-arm push-ups, 4. And he wondered why his kids were so strong. I don't know if he ever looked in the mirror, but you know, he was pretty. And he didn't do bodybuilding, he did not do weights, all he did was trampoline. So he started to investigate. Remember, I think this is 80s, this is mid-late 80s, and he couldn't find any research on the trampoline until he came to NASA. And he was interested to see what NASA found. Now, NASA's astronauts, when they go out of space for 2 weeks and then they'd come back, and they were very fit when they went. These were young men in their late 30s, 40s, maybe early 50s, but they had to be very fit. And when they came back, sometimes they'd lost 25% bone strength and muscle strength. And NASA found there was only one form of exercise that prevented them losing that much, and there was only one form of exercise that returned their body to previous strength very quickly, and that was trampolining. Trampolining was the only thing that maintained that strength, because when you go out of space, there's no gravity, and strength comes by defying gravity. That's how our strength comes. So what he found in his investigation was that there's 3 forces that come together with rebounding. One is defying gravity. So you think about how we gain strength. It's always defying gravity. That's your push-ups. You're pushing against gravity. But the most powerful, of course, is the rebounder, because you're constantly going against gravity. Acceleration. When you leave that mat, I'm still trying to master writing one thing, saying another. Acceleration. When you leave that mat, you are accelerating. The mat ricochets you up. And when you get to the tip or the peak of your jump, now we experience deceleration. And then as you come down, you're accelerating again. And then you hit the mat, deceleration. So it's acceleration, deceleration, acceleration, deceleration, you can't actually even say it the amount of time you're doing it. And he found a quote from Einstein that said, these 3 forces have the exact same effect on the human body. They have an effect on the body to strengthen every single cell, every single muscle, every bone. There's nothing that equals it. And he suggests 3 minutes, 3 times a day. That's not much, is it? And you can certainly do the high intensity. If you want to do high intensity on the rebound, you've almost got to jog on the rebound. And then you could go on the floor and just do some stretches, and then go back to your high intensity. But what also Albert Carter found is that when you're rebounding, it has a dramatic effect on your lymphatic system. Your those little valves are one-way valves. So when you leave the mat and you're at the tip of your jump, every gate opens. When you jump to the mat and hit the mat, every gate closes. Then it opens, closes, opens, closes. So it has this pumping effect on your lymphatic system. That's why when we had a guy come to the retreat at Alabama and his legs were swollen because they'd cut his lymph nodes out of his groin. Anyway, it's a long story, but he was 62. I said, I want you to get onto the rebounder every hour and just do this. Just do that for 1 minute every hour, because that will stimulate his lymphatic system. Even though he's lost these nodes, he has got other nodes and he has to work with that. He was so excited because within 48 hours the legs had gone down. They'd gone down probably 60%, which was impressive. So the rebounder is great because of the way it moves the lymphatic system. I got the most recent book by Albert Carter, and there's photographs of his son and daughter in there, and oh, they're incredibly fit too. But fascinating book, and I'm sure you Google rebounder, you'll get quite a few pieces of information. But it's a powerful form of exercise. I think every office should have one, even if there's 60 people in the office. Everyone can have 1 minute, can't they? And what you'll find is the office will probably close down at 3 o'clock instead of 5 o'clock because everyone will be working so well. But there's only one time exercise won't work. There's only one time you'll have trouble with exercise, and that is if you have not had water. We need to be well hydrated to exercise. So here's the cell, and here is the membrane. You see, our cell has a bilayered membrane around it, and water cannot get into the cell by itself. And that's why if someone says, I drink lots of water but it just comes straight back out, or I drink lots of water but my legs swell, do you know what that tells me? The water's not getting into there. So how do we get the water into there? Well, do you remember the 4 vitals? I know I'm guilty of information overload. Number 1 is oxygen, yes. Number 2 is water. Number 3, does anyone remember number 3?
Yeah.
Sodium. I know Monday was a long time ago. Number 4 is potassium. The 4 most vital elements needed for life. So if anybody tells you you shouldn't be having salt, this is a good answer, but sodium's the 3rd most vital element needed for life. But we should be taking sodium the way God made it. And you'll find the highest concentration of sodium in seawater. Seawater contains 92 minerals, and of those 92 minerals, 50% is chloride and 30% is sodium. And because these make up the largest amount of minerals, they're the first crystals formed when the water is evaporated from seawater. So you know what man does? Scoop that up, bleach it white, put aluminium with it so it runs freely, and has the hide to call it sea salt. Yeah? But there's only 2 minerals. And they make a fortune out of the grey slurry left, selling it as mineral supplements. So the best salt that you can use is the Celtic. And the reason why the Celtic salt is the best salt is because it's a hand-harvested sea salt. In fact, the French government have deemed this a heritage site. So no one can take it away, no one can stop it. And there are huge plateaus where they have the seawater in there, and the way it is, it's sort of in a little bit of a gully, so the wind and the sun dry the water quite well, and it's a hand-harvested sea salt, and it has those crystals. Have you seen those big crystals? Those big crystals are important because those big crystals lock into those crystals, or those little lumps, some of the very important trace minerals. There's even traces of iodine in there. But when they're crushed to fine, that does release some of those vital gases. That's why I like that lumpy sea salt. So Celtic salt contains 82 minerals. Where are the other 10? They're in pico proportions, barely measurable. And in Celtic salt, you will find 3 magnesiums. There's magnesium sulfate, magnesium bromide, and magnesium chloride. Magnesium sulfate is Epsom salts. And that explains why Celtic salt is so wet, especially when it rains. Probably not here in Colorado, where it's quite dry. But whenever it rains, those 3 magnesiums draw the water in. You see, magnesium is a water-hungry molecule. And so this salt is wet because of the 3 magnesiums. And when you put that Celtic salt on your tongue, give it a little crunch, let those lovely little boulders release their gases in your mouth. That's where you want them, in your body. The mucous membranes absorb the minerals, take it to the cell, you drink your water, and that magnesium pulls the water inside the cell. It's the quickest way to hydrate a body. The only time you can over-water yourself is to drink huge amounts and not replace the salt. In his book, The Calcium Lie, Dr. Robert Thompson says taking a crystal of Celtic salt before you begin each glass of water just replaces the minerals you lost yesterday. But we also put it on our avocado on toast, don't we? We also put it on potatoes. We put it in our... We have it on our foods. The Bible says in Matthew chapter 5 verse 13, "Ye are the salt of the earth. If the salt has lost its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is henceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under foot of men." It's Old English. I love the Old English. If the salt has lost its savour, I'd like to suggest that table salt with its 2 minerals has lost its savour. Is that right? It's lost all the other minerals. The Bible said it's now good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under foot of men. And so when I'm in Minneapolis in the middle of winter last year, I saw it. Throwing the salt on the road to melt the ice. And I remembered that verse. It is now henceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under foot of men. Seawater is called an isotonic solution because it is the exact same mineral balance and proportion. And we saw that when we looked at our bones, when we looked at blood, when we looked at all the fluids in the body, basically are very similar to seawater. Dr. Jacques Lelangre, French doctor who wrote the book The Secret Powers of, or Sea Salt's Hidden Powers, that's what it's called, Sea Salt's Hidden Powers. He calls our internal fluids our internal ocean, because it's the exact same mineral balance and proportion as is found as the ocean water. And I mentioned the other day, Dr. Robert Thompson, who wrote The Calcium Lie, he says it's the clearest indicator of a creator God is seawater. That Celtic salt is the salt that will give our body the minerals, and we looked at that when we looked at bones and osteoporosis. The highest concentration of mineral outside the cell is sodium. The highest concentration of mineral inside the cell is potassium. And there are sodium-potassium pumps. And those sodium-potassium pumps are constantly going like this. They basically work like that, maintaining the balance of potassium and sodium in and out of the cell. But if someone is eating on everything a lot of table salt with its 2 minerals, and that's all, and those 2 minerals are harsh minerals. If you were to inject sodium chloride straight into the cell, the person would die. Straight into the blood, the person would die. It needs all the other minerals to buffer it. So table salt, 2 minerals. And those minerals are so harsh that they kill the taste buds. Have you noticed when someone's eating a lot of salt, they put it on everything? They haven't even tasted the food to see if it needs it. They're putting it on everything. Yeah, that's because the table salt is killing their taste buds. But The Celtic salt, it awakens the taste buds. So when someone isn't eating any potassium foods, what are your potassium foods? All your fresh fruits and vegetables, they're high. They're high in potassium. You know what else is high in potassium? Cayenne pepper. So there on the table is our sodium with all of its minerals and our potassium. Let's say someone's not having any cayenne pepper, they're not having any fruits and vegetables. A lot of people are eating fast, refined food. There's an occasional lettuce leaf in the hamburger, that's about it. So what's happening to potassium? It's dropping. What's happening to sodium? It's rising. And this throws these pumps into array. They can't keep up the balance. And the highest concentration starts to merge into the lowest. That's osmosis diffusion. So sodium levels inside the cell start to rise. The cell swells. What's that called? High blood pressure. The doctor's right. Table salt does contribute to high blood pressure. But Dr. Lalangri, if he gets someone with high blood pressure, he puts them on Celtic salt. Because he says the minerals balance out this. That's called intracellular, extracellular. It balances out the intra and extracellular pressure. Calcium is a very important mineral. We looked at that because when calcium gets in, all the other minerals piggyback on the back of calcium. But calcium can't get into the cell by itself. It needs vitamin D. When vitamin D is present, now calcium and all the minerals can get into the cell. Glucose is the fuel used by every cell in the body, but it can't get into the cell by itself. It must have insulin. Insulin's the key that unlocks the door to get the glucose into the cell. Because remember, this is the CBD, this is the central business district of the human body. But let's say a person's on a high carbohydrate diet, they've stopped all the fat because they want to lose weight, and they're never satisfied, so they're eating carbohydrates all day, is that right? And so now there's too much glucose, and what the cell does is it starts to resist insulin. You've heard of insulin resistance? It's almost as if the cell says, we're sick of the sight of you. Too much, too much. So you've got insulin resistance, can't get in. The person doesn't go out in the sunshine because they think it's the enemy in the sky and it's going to give them skin cancer. So the calcium and the minerals can't get in. The person's not drinking much water and they're definitely not having the minerals. Can you see what's happening here? The water, the minerals, the glucose can't get in. And yet they've got to get in. So you know what the body does now? It says, I know, we'll just force it into the cell. What's that called? High blood pressure. High blood pressure can be the result of dehydration. It can be the result of mineral deficiency. It can be the result of vitamin D deficiency. It can be the result of overload of carbohydrates. But I've got some good news. When you implement the high intensity interval training, our cell starts to say, more fuel, instead of no more, no more. It needs more, so it starts to develop extra insulin receptor sites. Isn't that good news? You can't wait for a break till you can try it out, eh? So water's important, but as soon as you start drinking water, the salt also must be increased. And I've had many people say to me, since they've included that little bit of salt before their water, they're not running to the, we call it the little house, the outhouse. Well, it's inside now. They're not running as much. This is what I do in the morning. I have a little bit of salt, half a glass of water. Go to the bathroom, another half glass of water. Pray, another half glass of water on a little bit of salt. Before every glass, have a little bit of salt. Get dressed, have another half glass. So by the time I do my morning walk, I've usually had about 3 glasses of water. but little by little by little. Don't give your body a hurricane, which is what you do when you drink 16 ounces all at once. What happens when a hurricane comes? The topsoil goes away, everything blows away. How does God send the rain usually? Little by little by little. That's how you let the water go in, little by little by little. I'm on a plane a lot, and you don't want to, especially if you've got someone beside you, you don't want to be getting up every half hour. And I don't. Sometimes I can go on a 6-hour flight and get up once. That's because I just take the water in little by little and have the salt before every water. But when I'm on a long flight, I always ask my husband, get me the aisle seat. Because every few hours it's usually time. But we don't want to go every half hour. So I've just lectured here for an hour and a half, and yet this morning I had, probably 16 ounce, no, 32 ounces before breakfast. But I had it little by little by little by little. This is the stomach, and I learnt this in a book called One of the Body's Many Cries for Water. And in the book, One of the Body's Many Cries for Water, Dr. Batman Geheldich, we'll call him Dr. B, he's an Iranian doctor. He shows how one of the first places you lose water when you're dehydrated is the lining of the stomach. And when that lining of the stomach is so thin, acid can start to go through. He found it's one of the #1 causes of stomach ulcers is actually just dehydration. When we have a glass of water half an hour before the meal, we immediately thicken that mucosa lining on the wall of the stomach. He also found that in a case of dehydration, the person loses the thirst signal. So because I'm maintain good hydration in my body, if I don't have anything to drink after lunch and it's 6 o'clock at night, I can get some thirst because I've gone too long without water. But in a case of chronic dehydration, the person can lose that thirst signal. So thirst isn't a good sign. You just drink it because you know you've got to. Because in a day, our body loses from our kidneys. So I'll do litre loss, that's what I know. You know, a litre is a quart. So in a day, the kidney loses 1.5 litre loss. From the skin, it's 0.5 litre loss. But at the moment, with you doing the steam bath every night, it's probably up to 0.8 litre loss because you perspire profusely. The colon loses 0.3 litre loss, and your lungs, they lose 0.2 litre loss. So that equals 2.5 litre loss in a day, or you would say quart loss in a day. So we must supply at least 2 litres or 2 quarts, so that would be 8 glasses. The other half litre can come in our fruits, our vegetables, maybe if we have a vegetable juice. So that's not negotiable because there's no reserve tank on the back, is there? The only water that goes in is the water that we put in. Some people say, well, what about juice? How clean would your body be if you washed your body in juice? How clean would your body be if you washed it in tea and coffee? No, it must be water. Water and water alone. What's the best water? The best water is your filtered water, and you can get some quite good filters today. It's important to get a filter that will filter out fluoride and chlorine. Most filters will take chlorine out. In fact, you can pour a jug of water and put it on the bench, and in a few hours the chlorine has evaporated. But it's the fluoride. That's the one that takes a while to come out. If we come down to the pancreas releases hormones into the blood, and these hormones that are released into the blood are insulin and glucagon. And insulin and glucagon are both hormones that are predominantly made from water. So if you're dehydrated, your production of insulin and glucagon aren't going to be what they should be. But into the gut, into the gastrointestinal tract, there are quite a few enzymes. We looked at them the other day, so we won't list them all here. There's the pancreatic lipase, the pancreatic amylase, the trypsin and the chymotrypsin. So we'll just say enzymes. So the pancreas, it releases 2 hormones into the blood and quite a few hormones into the gut. And they all require water. They all require water to be made. One of the main functions of the colon, remember here's colon here. One of the main functions of the colon is to take water out so stools are formed. When we're dehydrated, more water gets taken out than should be taken out. Our brain is a hydroelectricity. No hydro, no electricity. When we don't have enough water, the brain cells shrink, and that hurts. It's not the only cause of a headache. But I've met many people that say, well, the only time I get a headache is if I'm dehydrated. And juice and definitely teas, coffees, soda pops, none of those will hydrate the body. They actually dehydrate the body even more. It's a deception. My fingers, I can open and shut them without any pain because around every joint there's water. 75% of upper body weight is held in the lower back by water. The other percentage is held by ligaments and tendons, muscles. My husband Michael has a friend who's a bricklayer, and he's a bit of a rough bloke. You know the word bloke?
Yes.
Man, bit of a rough bloke. And he was talking to Michael one day and he said, oh, the guys and I on the job site, oh, it's rough. Do you have that saying? He said, we're all crook. Have you heard that saying? Crook means sick or not going too well. So in fact, we say crook is rookward. That's the Australian saying. Michael said, what do you drink on the job site? He said, Coke. We all drink Coke. Bottles and bottles of Coca-Cola. Michael said, do you drink water? He said, no. It's hot. We like our cold Coke. And Michael said, well, no wonder your lower back's sore. He said, I've got a challenge for you. He said, stop the Coke and drink water. And he said, oh, as if that would make any difference. So Michael says, prove me. Try it. He said, righto, mate, I will. A week later, he rang up Michael and said, we haven't got any lower back pain. It was just dehydration. So 75% of upper body weight is held in the lower back by water. It's not the only cause of lower back pain. In fact, we'd all love it if back pain could always be that quickly fixed. But what you've got to remember is the biggest bones in your body are your femur. Biggest muscle mass in your body are your quads. And that's where we should bend from. And if you bend with a curved back, all the weight is taken there. But if you bend with a straight back, all the weight is taken on the biggest muscle mass. Have you seen how little 2-year-old, 18 months, pick up a ball? They go like this. And that's how they pick it up. That's how we should pick things up. Using, remember, your biggest muscle mass. So a lot of people have lower back pain purely because they lift so wrong. So when I've got a huge big suitcase coming up on the baggage claim, I'm looking around for someone that looks like Alvin. And if there isn't anyone, I just prepare myself and let it fall. But I usually find an Alvin to, excuse me, would you mind? Oh, certainly. And now it's on wheels and I can just push it along. But look after that back. How many people do you know with lower back problems? Yes, it can be dehydration. Yes, it can be the way they lift, the way they bend. But also, it can be that their abdominal muscles are weak, because all your abdominal muscles are connected to your back. So when your abdominal muscles are weak, then you don't have that posture. So we should all be standing erect. And when you've got strong abdominal muscles, it will be so. Have you seen how Carlos stands? Like this, strong. We're prince and princesses of the Most High King. So we should be standing with an erect form because we've got nice, strong abdominal muscles. So as you'll see, as we come to the last, as we've looked at the last one, you will be noticing that they almost all interact. Have you found that? Mm-hmm. You almost can't do one without the other. But these are the basic laws of health. And in that little book, The Ministry of Healing, one of my favourite books where I first read of these laws of health, the writer Ellen White, she said, these are the true remedies. These are the true remedies. Yes, hawthorn berry's excellent for the heart, but if you're not implementing these laws of health, the hawthorn berry is not going to be very effective. Yes, it's true that cayenne pepper is the best blood thinner, but if you're not implementing these laws of health, it won't be as effective. These are the true remedies. And these are simple, basic lifestyle principles that I can implement into my life. Florence Nightingale, she called these the laws of nursing. Dr. Jackson. Dr. Jackson from New York in the mid-1800s, late 1800s, he calls them the laws of life. So what interests me is I've looked at many writers from all over the world, and you'll find a lot of them as their basis has these laws. Dr. William Bates, in his book Better Eyesight Without Glasses, the last chapter summarises the basic conditions for strong eyes, and he lists those basic laws of health. It's really common sense, isn't it? But I love exploring the laws. I'm ever looking for more information on these because they're the true remedies. So we can never go past them. And tomorrow you'll find that they are just as important in mental health. My time is up. I think it's up. It is up. Yes?
I just had, you said, not to drink with our meals. I was wondering, like, before and after, how long should we?
So we should leave half an hour before, and ideally about an hour and a half after. If you're very, very thirsty after a meal, by all means have a mouthful. A mouthful's not going to make a huge difference. But having larger amounts should happen about an hour and a half to 2 hours after. Most people